Hi everyone, it's about 1 in the morning and I'm just finishing up a remote view and then I'm going to go to sleep. So for those people who don't know, I'm a remote viewer and I use a technique which is called heart-centered remote viewing, which is where I attempt through empathy to put myself in the shoes of another human being. And I'm going to try and explain it to people I'm going to try and explain some things to people. So tonight, I put myself in the shoes of Vladimir Putin again and his relationship with Donald Trump, because I think there's a lot that people are not getting, and so I'm going to help people get it as I see it from the perspective of Putin. To be clear about what's going on with Russia and Putin, no matter what we hear in the news, no matter what we think we know, the situation is beyond terrible in Russia, okay? The situation is beyond terrible in Russia. When this war got started, they had paid Prigozhin, the man that owned the Wagner Group. He got $1 billion to run Wagner, with the idea that Wagner was going to come in and clean up Ukraine in 3 weeks, okay? So since that time, Prigozhin has been killed. After attempting a coup to march on Moscow because he was angry about being fired because the Russian government could no longer afford how much money he was asking for. And so he ended up taking 40 million from the West, and for that reason he was assassinated. So this is just the start of the problems that Putin had. So he kills off Wagner. He fires the Wagner Group, he assassinates Prigozhin, and then he hires cheap rebels from other countries, soldiers of fortune that are willing to kill for $200 a month, which meant that all the well-trained Wagner people said, I'm not going to work for that kind of money. They took off, and then he got the cheap Chechens to come in, the cheap people to come in that were going to work for $200, the same as Russian soldiers. And they all died in Putin's meat grinder, okay? So then they all died, and because he doesn't have any money anymore, and he's blaming Prigozhin for bankrupting the military. We had said a couple of years ago that when I went into the energy of Russia, they were in pretty serious trouble. Like, we better do something about our financial situation because we don't have any money to pay these soldiers for a private military. The private armies, the contractors, just like we have in the United States, it was better pay to go with private contractors, for private companies that could bypass the rules of the army, right, was ultimately what took out Russia. So the Chechens died. The people that were taking $200 died. So then, in desperation, what does he do? He goes to North Korea. So he has a bunch of untrained soldiers from North Korea. He gets so desperate, he starts to release the prisons, the homicidal killers, the rapists, the criminals from the prisons of Russia, and sends them to go on the front lines and die. And now 1 million Russians are dead. So we start with a private army, which is a terrible idea because they had no loyalty to the state. Let that be a warning for the United States that's taking money, putting money towards private contractors to bypass U.S. laws that the U.S. soldiers have to live by. We'll just go with a private military, which will bankrupt the United States the way that it bankrupted Russia. But then your friends can get rich, right? So they went from that to the soldiers. Then from the soldiers, they started hiring the cheapest people. Then they were reduced to releasing their prisoners. Then they died. And now they're at a point where they're scrounging around with North Koreans. So these are poorly trained soldiers that are coming, often drug addicts and alcoholics, okay? Drug addicts and alcoholics from the prison system are the people, and the commanders are drug addicts because all the commanders died too. So that's why they're rebelling against their commanders, because they don't even have real commanders anymore. They've got drug addicts and criminals. Why? Because in war, you move through the ranks very quickly because so many people die. So Putin doesn't really have an army. So he's desperate. Well, I'll just have Trump come in and get to ceasefire and give us the Donbass while we clean up this disaster from which it's going to take us years to come back from. When I put myself in the shoes of Donald Trump, I feel tremendous anger and rage because I think about all the things I did for this punk. That's how I feel as Putin. The money I loaned him, right? The criminal enterprise of bribing people in positions of power that needed money. U.S. Congress people, people in political positions. I did favors for certain people. This guy better give me what I want. I put you in power. I put you in the position you're in. I bailed you out. I gave you money, and you're going to screw me over. And so the amount of anger that I feel towards this for what he did to me makes me, look, it's not going to be contained, which leads me to think that if Putin doesn't get what he wants pretty quickly, he needs a bailout, and he needs a bailout fast, regardless of what people, I don't even think the West realizes what bad shape he's in. All you have to do is follow the bouncing ball. He goes from a private elite group that's supposed to take out Ukraine in 3 weeks, they're supposed to be marching on Kiev in 3 weeks, to now begging for help from poor, starving North Koreans who are infested with worms and God knows what else, right? So it's looking pretty bad. And hundreds of people dying daily because they have no military training, and their officers don't have military training. The people training them don't have military training. And so where do we go from here? There's only one option at this point. I, as Putin, either you bail me out, either you get me to cease fire quickly, or I am going to engage in some act of intense revenge, because I want to remind you of the promises that you made me. You made me promises. So that goes back to this energy I feel where Trump is part of a church, where it's like giving your life to Christ. I mean, it feels like this true believer who has to be guilt-tripped into being reminded of, it's almost like it's worse than Catholic guilt, right? You're gonna burn in hell for this, right? So because of how I feel as Putin, I would not be surprised if he began to dump. If he starts to realize it's over for him, or if he starts to realize that this president has betrayed him, we could see, well, I think Putin's going to become increasingly irrational. violent and desperate, because it's fairly obvious to anybody with eyes that the Russian economy has gone up in flames, and he's going to become increasingly erratic and desperate, because he really doesn't, there's nothing left of the country. I mean, they are wiped out. They were wiped out when they took out Prigozhin, so imagine how bad it is now. And I think we could see a serious, violent response against Trump, and possibly some kind of expose if he doesn't get what he wants. If he doesn't get what he wants soon, just based on how I feel as Putin. All right, I want to thank you all for watching this quick remote. Be sure and share, like, and subscribe. And if you'd like to have a reading with me, be sure and check out all the information below this video. And remember, be kind to all so that all will be kind to you too. God bless. Peace out. We'll see you next time. I'm going to sleep.